welcome to the new people who join us today. Okay, so let's start, and if somebody else comes, well, they can join us through the session. So, if you remember, last week we talked a little about the biography of Luis Buñuel, and today we will focus on how his surrealist period in Paris influenced his later career, and we will discuss his films Ancien Andalou, which he shot in 1929, and L'Âge d'Or, which he shot in 1930. I gave you a link to L'Âge d'Or, which was a very short film. I hope you enjoyed. We discuss that later. So we mentioned on Tuesday that in the late 1920s, sorry, thought somebody else was coming. So we mentioned on Tuesday that in the late 1920s, Paris was the center of the European modernist movements, of which Surrealism was one of the most radical. These artistic and intellectual movements arise after the chaos and devastation of the First World War. People felt that rationalist philosophy was not sufficient anymore to explain life. So instead, they value the irrational and show contempt for tradition. So, what exactly is surrealism? In the film Midnight in Paris by Woody Allen from 2011, the film is set in the present day, and an American tourist in Paris finds himself magically transported to every night to the 1920s. So one night, he bumps into three famous surrealists whom you may recognize and tries to explain to them the extraordinary situation in which he is in. Let's see. Let me know if you don't hear the video.
Luis, oye, Luis. Señor Buñuel, Mr. Manley. Oh my gosh. Hello. Bender. This is Bender. Yes. And I am Dali. Yes. Good to remember. Bender is in a perplexing situation.
It sounds so crazy to say. You guys are going to think I'm drunk, but I have to tell someone I'm from a different time, another era, the future. Okay, I come from the 2000th millennium to here. I get in a car and I slide through time.
Exactly correct. You inhabit two worlds. So far, I see nothing strange.
Well, yeah, you're a surrealist, but I'm a normal guy.
So, you're surrealist, but I'm a normal guy. However, the surrealists would never thought that they were not normal. They believe that they are simply suggesting a more comprehensive view of reality. André Breton, who was one of the founding members of Surrealism, published the first manifesto of Surrealism in 1924. In the manifesto, as you see on the slide, the surreal was defined as the spark arising from the collision of two or more chunks of reality, which can be found in the unconscious dream, which is considered an integral part of reality. According to Breton, the main aim of the surrealists was to express, either verbally, by means of the written word, or in any other manner, the actual functioning of the unconscious mind. So, what were the influences on the Surrealists. We commented last week the influence on Buñuel of Charles Darwin, The Origin of Species. Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection was embraced by the Surrealists, as he challenged the traditional religious view that considered humans as possessors of an ennobling spirituality. On the contrary, he argued that they were driven by the same irrational impulses as animals. Another crucial influence was Sigmund Freud's theory of psychoanalysis, his interpretation of dreams. Like Darwin, he emphasized that human behavior was irrational and could only be completely understood by analyzing the mind's hidden instincts. For the Surrealists, this implied that social rules and amorality were nothing but a contract established to guarantee civilization. And this forced humans to repress their true desires. Those desires were only allowed to exist in the imagination. Therefore, the imagination is the only place where humans could be totally free. Another influence was the Marquis of Sade and his novel, The 120 Days of Sodom. While Sade's writings are considered cruel and immoral, that's where the word sadistic comes from, Buñuel justified his admiration, declaring that Sade's crimes were committed only in the imagination, as a way of liberating himself from the impulse to do it in real life. Finally, Karl Marx's communism was also an important political influence. Marx explained the irrationality of the purely material life, and he postulated that the problems of the economic order were not within the system, but the problem was the capitalistic system in itself. So, what did the Surrealists think about cinema? They received cinema, which at that time was a very new medium, with a special enthusiasm. First, it was very modern, so it had not been contaminated by tradition, by any established aesthetic tradition. At first, society and the establishment considered that cinema was immoral and corrupting. So, for the Surrealists, this was a revolutionary language which they could shatter bourgeois convention. The Surrealists loved going to the cinema, but they consider that the act of watching a film... Switch off mics, please. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So they consider the act of watching a film was creative. They thought the viewer makes the meaning. So the way they went to the cinema was that they had the custom of going to several films at the same time. They will be coming in and out of different cinemas in order to make a collage and create crazy meanings. They were not really interested in the film as a whole, but instead they would be looking for one moment, one scene, which will be considered subversive. Their favorite genres were comedy and horror, because in that type of films, people was inside to transgress moral rules and surrender to desire, not to restraint. The Surrealists considered that the cinematic image was a more powerful means for the expression of the irrationality of the human mind because the image in film resembled a dream. They hope that cinema will provide an ideal aesthetic language to challenge preconceived definitions of reality. For the Surrealists, dreams are part of reality. So, surrealist narratives incorporate dreams into reality. In surrealist films, they do not attempt to portray a fantastic world, but, as Kiru said, it was their duty to accept the wonderful as an absolute reality. The world in surrealist films was a real one in which the fantastic and the marvelous are integrated without any complex special effects. Unfortunately, despite their initial interest in cinema and a huge quantity of critical work, the surrealists produced very few films. The surrealist principles stipulate that art should make no concessions to commerciality, and this limits very much their possibilities in a medium so dependent of financial support and audiences. The most famous surrealist films, as you see on the slide, were precisely Ancien Andalou, L'Âge d'Or, some short films directed by Man Ray, who is the photographer we saw on the clip Midnight in Paris, and La Coquille et le Clergyman by Germain Dulac, but this last film was received extremely negative by the movement. So, I send you the link to Ancien Andalou, and you have to watch it. Let's stop for a minute, open the mics, and please, could you tell me what were your impressions in about Ancien Andalou? Summer blockbuster. It was not compulsory, but somebody who watched it, what did you thought?
Several times before. The opening sequence.
Oh, yes.
Yes, you look away every time. And sometimes I wonder whether I'm overanalyzing the film, and sometimes it just affects you directly. It's you're almost trying to put some logical sequence into something that has no logic, but has a feeling of having cohesion, if you like. And I think that clash, for me, is what is intriguing about the film. It doesn't feel like a cohesive whole, even though the sections of it are so disconnected and, well, surreal.
Well, I must confess that to this day, I've seen Ancien Andalou plenty of times, and whenever the I scene appears, I cover mine.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. After the exposition, we will talk a little more about Ancien Andalou. I was frightened that after watching that, you will run for the hills, but... Okay. So let's continue. And let's see if we can make any sense of Ancien Andalou. Can you see the slides?
Yeah.
Okay. Ancien Andalou was a collaborative effort between Luis Buñuel and Salvador Dalí. The narrative, if there is one, is based on a principle of free and irrational association. However, and it seems Paul agrees, Buñuel denied that the film was illogical. He said that their intention was to present dream and reality as continuous and undistinguishable, in accordance to what Breton thought surrealism should be. One important influence in the narrative of Ancien Andalou was la greguería. You see on the slide. Greguería is a literary genre created by Spanish writer Ramón Gómez de la Serna, and it is defined by de la Serna himself as humor plus metaphor. The greguerías were one-line sentences, like a one-line poem, which associated two completely unrelated elements. You have an example there. La luna es el ojo de buey del barco de la noche. The moon is the porthole of the night ship. This gregeria seems to have influenced one of the most shocking images of ancient Andalus. Please mute the mics. So, in cinema, as you know, the story is told by means of the juxtaposition of images, and meaning is constructed through the editing. If we want to do a gregeria in film, this means that our editing is going to break the link joining the objects to their habitual environment, and is going to redefine their identity in another context, proposing a very unusual association. So there you have the slashing eye scene, which Everett has described, like Paul, as a physical assault on the spectator. By the way, the eye was actually the eye of a dead cow. They put some makeup on the cow. Yes, I know. Okay, so this scene is like a visual gregeria. In the film, we first see the cloud cutting the moon, and then we juxtapose it to the razor cutting the eye, creating an association. Okay? In order to reflect the workings of the dream, the unconscious, Surrealist art used practices like automatic writing, which means that works of art had to be composed with the first ideas that came to the mind, without looking for any kind of meaning or symbolism. This, to be honest, was not a technique invented by the Surrealists, but had already been used in the creation of 18th century Gothic novels. Do you know a novel by Horace Walpole called The Castle of Otranto? He said that it was inspired on a dream and written spontaneously in an intermediate state between vigil and dream. So, in order to understand what automatic writing was, we are going to play one of the Surrealists' favorite games. This game is called Exquisite Corpses. Look in the slide. Sometimes this game took the form of drawing. They would fold a paper in different pieces, and everybody had to draw on it without seeing what the others had done. Another way of playing is that each person had to say one element of the sentence without thinking, the first idea that came to their mind. The game is called Exquisite Corpses because of the first sentence they got. Le cadavre exquis boira le vin nouveau. The exquisite corpse shall drink the new wine. So you see there how it is played. One person says who, in this case the corpse. Another person says what was who like, exquisite. Another said what that who did, drinking. Another to what it did it, the new wine. Later, they increase the difficulty and they also add when and where. So, you can open mics now, and I'm going to ask you each to say one part of the sentence. I'm choosing people at random, and you will tell me one part of the sentence. However, don't say it yet, just think it. When I say your name, you say each your part of the sentence, and we see what we get. Do we understand how we play? Yeah? Okay, so let's see. Paul, you say who, not yet. Jane, what was who like? Patricia, what who did. Diane, to what. Catherine, when. And Carmen, where. Okay? Everybody ready?
Yeah. Doing it in English?
If you can do it in French or in Spanish, I understand both, but I think it's better in English. Okay.
Because if we're doing it in English, I have to start, don't I? Because the adjective comes before the noun.
Good point. Everybody has what they are going to say? Forbidden to change it, eh? Okay, so Jane?
The greedy.
Paul?
Which?
Sorry?
Which? The which?
Which? Patricia?
Yes. Bruja.
Thank you. Open mic, Patricia. Open mic.
Play tennis. Play tennis.
Play tennis. Diane. Now.
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to think with what she's just said.
No, that's not what you must not do. Say that.
Oh, I was good.
Shh. Say.
The elf.
Catherine?
4:45.
When?
At 3:45.
At 3:45. Carmen, where?
China.
Sorry?
In China.
In China. Thank you. That's what you must know. You must never do. You must never think. It's the first thing that comes to mind. So, let me send the message. The greedy witch plays tennis with the elf at 3:45 in China. That's how you do it. Well done.
That's real.
Yes. So, this is the way in which Buñuel and Dalí designed the scene in Ancien Andalou in which the man pulls the pianos. They will be sitting one next to the other and they say, okay, there is the man and the woman. What is he pulling? Okay, 2 pianos, 2 dead donkeys, 2 priests, and she throws at him what? A tennis racket. So that's how they did it. That's the logic in the way they did the scene. This is automatic writing. Okay?
But that's not logic, is it?
That's the point of it.
Yes, I know, but yeah, it's a really I suppose we're so used to thinking one way, and it feels like just whatever, wherever and however.
You made a good point. We are going to discuss that right now. Is illogic, and we are used to logic. Ancien Andalou established the basis of surrealist film narratives. It's like a textbook on surrealism. And they established what is going to be called the paisemann technique, which literally, as Diane correctly points, means disorientation. Everything is illogical, and this is regular in the films directed by Buñuel. We are used to mainstream films. Mainstream film narratives use the model of invisible editing. You see it on the left on the table. And the codes were developed in early Hollywood by silent cinema directors like Griffith. In this model of editing, all the events have a logical explanation, and the image aims to construct the narrative as a coherent and understandable chain of events, where every element has a function. On the contrary, the editing model of the paisemann aims for the audience to be shocked and confused about the cinematic reality. The shots are planned to leave elements unexplained, and the distinction between dream and reality is blurred. The film then becomes a representation, a visual representation of automatic writing, as the editing does not follow a strict pattern of cause and effect. Classic cinema narratives establish very clearly the pass of times. Surrealist temporal continuity is unclear. It requires the attention of the spectator to figure out how time passes. What most interests the surrealists about the cinema was the possibility of manipulating temporal continuity, mimicking automatic writing. If you remember Ancien Andalou, the intertitles are deliberately confusing. They start 8 years later, then 16 years before, but we don't seem to move from the same night. It's very confusing. The invisible editing presupposes a passive spectator who is explained everything and can interpret the cinematic reality without effort. This type of editing fulfills the commercial purposes of cinema, which are to produce pleasure in the spectators and encourage them to identify with the characters. On the contrary, the paisemann presupposes an active spectator who has to deduce and reconstruct the cinematic reality. Ancien Andalou also marks the first time that Buñuel uses Wagner's opera Tristan and Isolde. He uses it again in L'Âge d'Or and Abismos de Pasión, as he preferred pre-existing musical pieces instead of composing a soundtrack. This is another example of the paisemann technique. Wagner's opera, who has a special meaning for Buñuel, is transposed to a different context where it acquires a new meaning. So, which mode of editing is more realistic, the paisemann or invisible editing? Despite invisible editing being more understandable, it can be argued that the paisemann is more realistic. Life does not work according to reason. Buñuel justified films being enigmatic or incongruous because life is that way also, repetitive and subject to many interpretations. Then the paisemann represents the unpredictability of life better than invisible editing. Okay? So, Ancien Andalou has influenced many films. From industries as different as Hollywood, you have on the top the movie Spellbound, directed by Alfred Hitchcock, which a lot of eyes. Does that sound familiar? And also influenced this film from Senegal, directed by Ousmane Sembène, called Welgar. In Welgar, there is a burial, but they lost the body, so the widow puts the clothes of her husband on top of the bed, like the lady does at the beginning of Ancien Andalou. The dream sequences in Spellbound were actually designed by Salvador Dalí himself, who reused some of his previous ideas. But these ideas were tame for Hollywood standards. Instead of a dead cow, the slashed eyes are an obvious carboa, so we don't shock anybody. And the meaning of the dream is fully decoded for the spectator. The dreamer is talking to his psychoanalyst, and the psychologist, played by Ingrid Bergman, decodes every element and even solves the mystery with this dream. And this is what is going to happen to Buñuel from the 1950s onwards, with the arrival of psychoanalytic film theory. Many critics and scholars attempt to find the hidden meanings of the motifs in Buñuel's film. In truly surrealistic fashion, Buñuel was always adamant that no meaning was intended. He insisted that those details that the critics endlessly analyze were improvised during shooting, with the exclusive purpose of enriching a scene. In Belle de Jour, there is a man who brings a box, you open it and you hear, and people look and says, oh no, but nobody shows you what is in the box. There are doctoral theses written about the contents of the box, but Buñuel said that the box has whatever you want to be there. In fact, he once said, "I shoot the sequence without thinking about any symbolism. What I do is that I buy Cahiers du Cinéma after the release, and then I found out what did I meant." Okay? Yes. So, if La Ancien Andalou provoke a scandal, L'Âge d'Or made things worse. In 1930, Buñuel released his second film, L'Âge d'Or, which this time had a standard duration of 63 minutes and include some sequences with sound and dialogues. The involvement of Buñuel in this project with Salvador Dalí was brief. Salvador Dalí, this coincided with the breaking of their friendship, so Salvador Dalí abandoned this project and Buñuel directed it alone. This film inaugurates a new socially satiric vein in surrealist art, and we could say that it exposes the superficiality of high society and religion, combined with a quite positive presentation of a disruptive and irreverent passion. The middle section of L'Âge d'Or shows the foundation of Imperial Rome, attended by a group of priests, the military, and politicians, the pillars of society. The ceremony is interrupted by the cries of pleasure of two lovers who are rolling and kissing in the mat. Next week, we will talk a little more about this section of L'Âge d'Or and this couple. But this week, we focus on the scandal which surrounded L'Âge d'Or. To be honest, this scandal was not only provoked by the contents of the film, but by the political climate of the time. By 1930, Paris was suffering the first stages of the violence that would lead to the Second World War. The disputes between left-wing and right-wing groups were an everyday occurrence. The last bit of L'Âge d'Or transposed the ending of the Marquis of de Sade, the 120 Days of Sodom. And the protagonist is the Duke of Blanges, described as the main organizer of the criminal orgies, a very cruel and depraved character. According to the film, the Duke of Blanges is the man in the photo you have on the slide. You see it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Audiences and critics says that that man did not look like the Duke of Blanges, but looked like somebody else. Who did you think they thought he looked like?
Jesus.
Jesus.
Okay. Yes, he looks suspiciously similar to Jesus Christ. In fact, the actor Lionel Salem usually played this role in religious films. So, because of this and many other things that happen in the film, L'Âge d'Or was accused of blasphemy. The Pope threatened to excommunicate the producer, and the premiere of the film was attacked by a right-wing group who threw ink to the screen and destroyed the painting exhibition in the lobby. The film was finally banned from exhibition for 50 years. The person who banned the film was a police prefect called Chiap. In Buñuel's later film, Diary of a Chambermaid, there is a scene mocking a police prefect also called Chiap. However, Buñuel claimed this was just a coincidence. So, although Buñuel insisted there were no hidden meanings in his films, maybe we cannot always believe that his intentions were so innocent. However, as he was a filmmaker used to provoke polemic, to pretend that the scandalous meaning was in the eye of the beholder could be a good tactic to avoid censorship. To be honest, nobody knows what Jesus Christ looked like. This is just an iconic image established by religious art. So, is there blasphemy, or are censors just bent on looking for sin? Question for our discussion later. The Surrealists finished as a movement, to be honest, victim of its own contradictions. The radical revolution that the Surrealists proposed was more theoretical than real. Despite criticizing the bourgeoisie, the vast majority of the members were able to live on the margins of social conventions because they were bourgeois with family fortunes to support them. Second, despite considering that marriage was a reproductive prison, the Surrealists were not especially interested in challenging patriarchal stereotypes. One of the reasons why the film La Coquille et le Clergyman was received so negatively was because the director was Germaine Dulac, who was a woman. And the Surrealist women artists like Meret Oppenheim or Lee Miller complained that their male counterparts regard them as muses and not as creators in their own right, and that the Surrealist works of art are usually position women as the object of erotic desire of the male artist. Lee Miller was an accomplished photographer, a war journalist by her own right, but nowadays she's mainly remembered as man race, lover, and muse, which is unfair. Third, the strong rejection of moral and artistic conventions resulted in a series of strict self-imposed rules which provoke continuous and frequently futile, quite stupid, disputes between the members. There were two tendencies in Surrealists. Some Surrealists, like Luis Buñuel, regard the movement as revolutionary, a way of rejecting the ideology of the establishment. Other members prefer to concentrate on Surrealists as an aesthetic experiment. That would be Georges Bataille, for example. In 1929, André Breton published the second manifest of Surrealists, where he left very clear that any Surrealist reluctant to compromise with the revolution would be expelled from the group. So the group ended being split in two. Buñuel did not see the point of all these controversies. He remained in good relations with Bataille. So, although he kept his Surrealist ideals all his life, he finally decided to separate from the Surrealist group in 1932, because he considered that they had become an intellectual aristocracy totally isolated from the world. In our next sessions, we will see how he maintained all the Surrealist ideals later in life. But now, oh good, we have plenty of time for questions and for opening our discussion today. So I'm going to stop sharing, but before, here you have some bibliography, Paul Hammond's study about Last Door. I found this quite recent study of Ancien Andalou. I hope it is quite comprehensive. This is Midnight in Paris, the movie whose clip we watch. Okay? So I'm going to stop sharing. You can unmute the microphones. Okay? And if anybody has any question, we can, if not, we can start our discussion. Any question? You can unmute now. Question?
Questions? No, I think people's opinions more. I think that was right.
Yes, opinions.
I think people all have very different views of the film. You know, I'm one of the few males that I can see on here. So
Louder, louder.
I'm one of the few males here, so I'll probably see it in a different way to a female.
Maybe.
There is definitely an argument in the film between both sexuality, and some of that quite violent, and romance as well. And the Tristan and Isolde theme, for me, keeps pulling me back to a more romantic view of things, although what's actually happening on the screen visually is very different and at times quite abusive. And I think that is probably what Buñuel was trying to do. It's that surrealist idea, isn't it, of two views colliding and making you feel confused, discombobulated, I think is a pretty good term for it. It's very strange the effect it has on you. I wonder what other people thought of, you know, for example, the lust scene and the way that was handled. In 1929, I would imagine was particularly shocking. The third part of the film, with the nudity in it. But it's still provocative now, and the woman's response, she's repelled in a lot of the scene, but not in all of it. It's a strange scene. I just wondered what people thought of that particular scene.
You mean the last scene when...
Lust, not last. Lust.
No, it's my pronunciation, I understood.
Oh, sorry.
You mean when the man is touching the woman?
Yes.
Okay. Something to clarify. I know it was 1929, but the movies before 1930 will be quite open about sex standards. In 1930 is when the Hays Code comes and when they start to restrict. But before, that was the reason they called them immoral, and you could find nudity and sex and things we wouldn't imagine. So anybody and any of the other person want to share their views about this scene? Don't be shy. Mar?
Well, actually, I understood quite well what I saw. I saw it twice, and I still don't know actually what I saw. So I think I need to visualize more times. But it's like I could not. I think it's really good work trying to diffuse the edges between the reality and the dreams. But I was trying to think in this scene what was happening, because it comes from another scene in which like the other girl has died, and then it seems like he was really shocked about that, and she was like more not affected, and then suddenly it changed completely. And then after that, I was like a little lost. And then after that, I saw the man in the bed. So my brain tried to think like maybe this is not a dream, but this is like something that came from a brain who is dying, and because he was like instead of coming from her dream, it comes from his. I don't know how to say that, like his problems or his traumas, because he was like ill before. But anyway, I don't understand.
No, that was the point, don't worry. You have made an excellent point, which is the girl has died, she's not affected, then he starts touching the woman. In many of Buñuel's films, there is this association between sex and death, between love and death. And did you see the faces he was making? Buñuel said that when somebody is agonizing and dying, you kind of act the same as when you are in sexual ecstasy. You put the same face. Mm-hmm. So in many of his films, love and eroticism is associated to death. So you made an excellent point. And don't worry if you didn't understand what Ancien Andalou was trying to tell you, because that's the main point.
Yeah, I guess so.
No, it's like this. Even I watch it and I still don't know what this is about. But this is the main point. Yes. And is whatever you wish to be. Any other?
Yeah, for me, it's a bit like when you wake up from a dream and you can't quite remember it properly. I feel like I can't quite remember even just the little bit I've just watched properly, because the next bit is so disjointed from it, or there's an image that pops up that's nothing to do with it, or is really unexpected. And I don't know, it just does something to my brain that makes, I don't know, it's like when you can just remember snatches of things that don't really fit together, and it's very disorientating, I think.
That's precisely the point.
It is. It feels like it's more, normally when we watch films for plot and character and story and themes, and this feels more like it's kind of designed to provoke emotion and experience, rather than kind of convey any sort of meaning.
You're spot on, Catherine. That's exactly the point. Paul, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I agree with Catherine that, we tend to watch more modern films. We're quite passive, really. We watch a story. Mm-hmm. Whereas this, as Catherine was saying, it generates a response to feelings. So in a way, we are a much more active participant in the film, if you like. And I think you're filling in the gaps. You're almost part of the creative process. Which is probably why the film seems different when you watch it at different stages in your life, or when you're in different moods. So I find that, as I say, although I first saw this film probably 40 years ago in a film club, and I've revisited it occasionally since then, haven't seen it for a while, but it just continues to intrigue me, and like Catherine, I still don't know what it's about.
I don't think even Buñuel knew, don't worry. But Catherine made a good point. This is the visual representation of a dream. This is the aim that the Surrealists chased, to represent a dream visually. I mentioned the movie Spellbound. Has anybody here watched it?
Long time ago.
Yes. Well, here you have Gregory Peck, and it's his dream. But he's telling the dream aloud to the psychologist. And every time he speaks, and then I saw this room with, oh yes, this means the madhouse in which we are. And the women, this means your desire for me. So every element in his dream is given an explanation. But Catherine said it perfectly. When you dream is disjointed, you don't know why you dream things. They may have no meaning. You remember it disjoint, it has no logic.
I think one of the disconcerting things is that you're constantly trying to make meaning out of it when you're watching it, and it's just not possible. Or maybe it is possible, but it wasn't possible for me.
No, I think that's what I was trying to say before, though, in a way, because we're I can't think of the word I want, but it's the way the word isn't trained, but I'll use trained. We're trained to look for logic, aren't we? And if things aren't logical, you see, I think I was a bit of a surrealist at university, because they always used to say to me, you've got all the ideas right, but you're not very logical. And I don't seem to be a logical person. I don't know whether any of the other friends here would agree, but the one thing I can always say, unfortunately, I haven't seen them recently. I saw these films, I think it was in my first year at uni, which is a trillion years ago, but I still have flashbacks to those films, how much they affected me, the eye-cutting scene, and I was very affected by the banquet scene in El Ángel Exterminador, because I just found that so shocking. That because they make, even though it's illogical, it is portrayed in a way that you believe it, I think. Yeah.
Yes, that's it. But it's what we were discussing. Life has no logic. Yes.
So in order to make life have meaning, we kind of impose our own kind of interpretations and generalizations of things to kind of try and categorize things. But when we do that, we kind of automatically miss out things that don't fit neatly in the categories we've formed. And I guess this film's kind of around the edges of those categories, the things that don't neatly fit into things that we can describe or explain easily.
Yes.
I think we're taught to be we're taught to be
Diane. You said, Diane?
I said, I think what I was trying to say was we tend to be taught to be conformist, and you know, I agree with Catherine that these go against the grain, because you're thinking, well, hang on, I can't really make a lot of sense of this, and it's not logical. But I wonder whether also they feel it, in a way, or is the logic of dreams more real than everyday life?
Yes. And precisely what you said, that we are made to conform, this is what the Surrealists challenged. They wanted not to conform to ideal, not to conform to convention. They want to challenge all of that through their art. Michael is saying that the dismembered hand in the street element of the film did not appear to have any connection with any other part of the film. Well, yes, that's the point. Why is she pushing a dismembered hand? The dismembered hand is going to appear again in El Ángel Exterminador, you will see. And the idea was used in a Hollywood movie, the finger with the five finger, the beast with 5,000 fingers. Yes, but you're right. It has no connection. And in any case, what is this girl in the middle of the street pushing a hand so quiet? It may have a meaning, but we don't know. For example, in real life, one night, my friend arrived to the student residence where we live, and she found me kneeling on the floor, throwing rice under a car. If this were a surrealist film, she would just say, "Good night, Maria," and leave. But this was an invisible editing film, so she said, "What's wrong with you, Maria?" And I said, "There is a pigeon which is injured and trying to capture it to cure it." But imagine, in a film by Buñuel, they will just show me throwing rice and leave. So sometimes it's what you explain about reality.
Yeah.
Any comment?
I just wanted to say.
Sorry.
I just wanted to say it's really interesting how all of you have picked up on specific images that have affected you, and you've remembered it from university, and it's just I'm researching Buñuel at the moment, so, and this kind of the fact that we take on these images within his films, and we kind of, they're ingrained in our memories. So it's just really great to hear that you know, it's so effective and so striking to have that impact on you. And I'm just wondering, when you watch these films, was your reaction were you quite horrified as well? Because I remember the first time I watched these films, they're also quite, you know, physically arresting.
I first thought I watched Un Chien Andalou 25 years ago at university in a seminar, and we weren't really warned what it was going to contain. And the only thing that any of us could remember afterwards was the eye. It's almost like we didn't watch the rest of it. I haven't seen it since then, apart from yesterday. But yeah, I think if you talk to anybody who's in that seminar with me, that's all they could remember. And I'm sure they'd still remember it now.
Yes.
I think, Carmen.
Diane, then Patricia. Okay, Diane.
Oh, sorry. Carmen, it's good in a way because you obviously have reacted from such a different, time warp, really, because I'm clearly a lot older than you are. And if it's still shocking you today, then, I suppose they've achieved greatness in a way because they've allowed what they've tried to do, to become, it sounds a bit corny to say eternal, but in a way it has, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Because you will have been exposed to far more violence than we were, I think, if you know what I mean, in daily life, film, gaming, all that sort of stuff. Yeah. No, I'm liking that comment a lot. It's getting a thumbs up.
Yes. Okay, Patricia?
Well, I saw the film first time many, many years ago. And of course, there were two scenes I remember. The eye, I think we all remember the eye scene. But the other scene I remember is the piano pulling scene. And I love that scene. And to me, it's the beauty of cinema, because you couldn't do that in any other art form so well. I mean, if you wrote about it, I mean, if it were just words, lines in a book, I mean, so what? Or maybe a painting, but I think just it's pure cinema. I think pure cinema.
Okay, I'm conscious we are out of time. I love all your comments. You are spot on. You are understanding everything perfectly, even when the purpose is that we understand nothing. And if anybody has any further comment, you can either email it or share it with us next week, in which we are going to continue talking a little about Last Door, and we are going to talk about the way in which Buñuel, as a surrealist, understood adapting a literary text for the screen. We will watch the film, a little clip of Abismos de Pasión, which is not available, but we are going to watch a clip, so don't worry. And on Thursday, it will be El Ángel Exterminador, and as this is a standard film, I will try to send you the link earlier than Wednesday, so I give you time. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, María. Gracias.
Gracias.
Thank you, Maria.
Gracias.